I have been openly critical of the not-for-profit governance model. Most of my work and critique of that comes through an arts and culture sector lens, which puts me in the awkward position of critiquing a system while desperately trying not to dismiss the generosity of the people within that. So I'm going to ask us to engage with two simultaneous but contradictory ideas. Firstly, that boards and board members can and do fantastic work, but also that board members can and do work that can damage their organisations and damage the teams and damage each other. Though I do genuinely believe that if boards and board members are failing, it's because we're being set up to do so by the model itself. This work is almost exclusively done by volunteers. It puts a team of volunteers, often with little or tangential experience, in charge of a team of paid experts. Those volunteers change regularly, and statistics are telling us that that volunteerism is decreasing over time. So 63% of Australian non-profit organisations are organisations with a turnover of $250,000 or less a year, delivering, as we know, over and above our remit time and time again, which means we just don't have the time or capacity or resources to do much more than concentrate on basic organisational survival, and certainly not to address the problems that bad boards or a bad governance model can cause. Even when they're working well, there's still much more work than either arts managers or board members would prefer, partly because we have to jump through a proportionately much higher number of hoops than a lot of other sectors for the public funding we receive, and partly because board members often don't understand the difference between what the legislation requires of them, what the organisation needs from them, and what it is that they personally want to do. 18% of Australia Council respondents, responding organisations, only 18% had at least one First Nations person on their board, 20% with at least one disabled person, 23% with at least one person aged 25 years or younger, and 33% with one LGBTQIA+ person. And then these two, which were actually sung as success stories, 74% have at least one community representative, though it was unclear in that research whether that community included communities of artists. People management and duty of care issues become an even bigger issue, with burnt out boards really dropping the ball. And they didn't have the great hold on the ball in the first place, but they've really dropped the ball on their duty of care at a time when their CEOs and their teams really needed them needed them most. Which is why I am flying the less is necessary flag today, my one-woman campaign, and why I think duty of care is really the pointiest end of arts governance right now, because it's really the thing that we're going to have to address before we can even think about having the capacity to address the bigger issues. This new crisis that we're in, that has these really hyper-individualised symptoms, with that delayed trauma of the pandemic manifesting in very personal but almost identical ways, is just as urgent a crisis. It's just harder to see because it's so individualised. The impact, though, is much easier to spot. Burnout, illness, former best practice organisations suddenly being very unpleasant places to be, and artists and employees leaving the sector or leaving creative practice entirely, which is putting a whole generation of artists and arts workers and arts leaders at risk. And it's leaving those of us who remain with even less energy to be able to come together and to solve these problems collectively, to reset. Induction, more than half of OSCO participants, 66%, said they'd never received an effective induction. So even before we start talking about the efficacy of governance training, 30% of OSCO response board members have never had any. 40% said they'd benefit from some, and 66% said they would benefit from fundraising training. However, that report didn't ask whether board members would be interested or willing to undertake that training. 45% of organisations said that some, few or no one at all on the board had sufficient understanding of the organisation's finances, which, just like measuring diversity in increments of one, when we measure our financial expertise often in an increment of a sole treasurer or financially minded board member, it places undue pressure on that person, but also obviously is not great for the organisations. The Australia Council report had 9 key findings. Only one of them was positive, which was that 88% of board members said that they understood their responsibilities, and 94% said they enjoyed their roles, which is lovely. And I'm very pleased. But they've just told us that they were never inducted, and they have not, more than half of them have never been trained. So how on earth do they know what their responsibilities are that they purport to understand? And of course, they're enjoying their roles if no one is holding them to accountability for not meeting those things. 58% of board members don't attend their organisation's events, and 56% admitted that they don't have a clear understanding or ability to speak on behalf of their organisations. Timeliness has become increasingly fraught over the last few years of constant emergencies. And as we've all seen in the news recently, good boards can become, great boards can become awful boards in the space of a single AGM. With even statutory authorities and better funded institutions making headlines recently. One of the amazing ironies that I find when working with boards is that they will acknowledge this, but don't think it applies to them. And so that's why this is so powerful, because we can go back and go, statistically, guys, it does. We do need to keep returning to how we support ourselves and each other as we work our way through these issues, and how we chip away at the problems and start moving towards solutions, so that we can not only be allies and accomplices for the change that we want to see, the change we know needs to come, but also for raising awareness of the challenges and the organisational and personal challenges of working within this imperfect system in the meantime. Not just focusing on the end prize, but how we get ourselves there as safe and as well as possible.